Hello, dear audience. Welcome to our story channel. Today we will explore a true story full of emotions, love, and unexpected twists. A story that, just by hearing, will surely make your heart beat faster. It may even bring tears to your eyes. The title of the story is Married to My Biological Father. Now I invite you to join us for part 1 of the story about a love that was left unfinished in 1988, when the war in Cambodia was reaching its final stages. The Vietnamese volunteer soldiers continued to fight day and night to help the neighboring country escape the devastation of the Khmer Rouge regime. Among them was Tuan, a 28-year-old young man who was always dedicated to his mission and comrades. During a march through the province of San, his unit stopped at a small village where he met Chun Tha, a beautiful Cambodian girl with long, shiny black hair and a gentle smile. Chun Tha was living alone after losing her entire family in the war. She often helped the volunteer soldiers by cooking and taking care of them when they were wounded. Tuan and Chun Tha quickly became close, despite the language and cultural differences. They shared stories about their youth and dreams of living in peace one day. Chun Tha's sincerity and Tuan's feelings led to the blossoming of love, but the war did not allow happiness to last. At the beginning of 1989, all the volunteer soldiers were ordered to leave Cambodia and return to Vietnam, including Tuan. Before returning with his unit, he promised Chun Tha that he would come back to Cambodia when the situation stabilized. He gave her a small wooden comb engraved with their names, Tuan and Chun Tha, as a keepsake. Chun Tha stood silently, watching Tuan and the Vietnamese military vehicles slowly disappear down the dirt road. At that moment, she didn't know that she was carrying a tiny life within her, the beautiful product of her love for Tuan. Part 2 of the story. The Dark Days in Phnom Penh. When Tuan's figure faded into the distance, Chun Tha remained standing there, clutching the wooden comb engraved with their names. Her heart felt torn by the pain of separation. Tuan was the last person Chun Tha could rely on, but now she was left alone in a war-ravaged land. Her small village, once a home, had become desolate after the war. There were no familiar faces, no loved ones. Her family was gone, leaving her stranded in a cold, lonely world. Unable to stay in a place filled with painful memories, Chun Tha had no choice but to leave her hometown and seek survival elsewhere. She moved to Phnom Penh, the chaotic capital, which was the only place where she might have a chance to rebuild her life. On the crowded bus, bouncing along the dusty roads, Chun Tha held the wooden comb tightly to her chest, clinging to the fragile hope it represented. But deep inside, she knew the road ahead would not be easy. When she arrived in Phnom Penh, Chun Tha felt that her old name was a mark of her past life, a life destroyed by war and loss. She decided to change her name to San, meaning golden light in Khmer, hoping that a new life would bring some light into her dark world. However, every time she reminded herself that she needed to be strong, the emptiness and pain would overwhelm her. Life in Phnom Penh was not easy. San had to do every kind of odd job to make a living, from washing dishes to carrying water and selling goods in a small, cramped, rented room. She lived from day to day, with only enough food to keep from starving. Little did she know, deep within her, a tiny life was forming, a product of love between her and Tuan. At the end of 1989, on a rainy afternoon, San gave birth to a beautiful baby girl in that small room, all alone. She named the child Sovan, which means gentle girl in Khmer. At the first sight of her daughter, San's tears flowed uncontrollably. Sovan was the only source of life left for her. But joy was fleeting. Just a few months after giving birth, San began to feel her health deteriorating. She noticed strange dark spots appearing on her skin, which began small but soon spread all over her body. The doctors at a small clinic in Phnom Penh diagnosed her with lupus, a chronic disease where the immune system attacks the body. This illness not only affected her health, but also changed her appearance. Her skin became dark and rough, losing its youthful glow. San often looked at herself in the old, cracked mirror, unable to recognize the sickly woman staring back at her. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights caring for her daughter, and her skin was scarred by the disease. She felt as though she had lost herself. Many nights she would hold Sovan and cry, wondering if she had the strength to raise her child. Every time she looked at Sovan, sleeping peacefully in her arms, she felt both happiness and sorrow. Happiness, because her daughter was the only reason she kept going. Sorrow, because she could not provide Sovan with a better life. Every time she thought of Tuan, her heart ached. She wondered if he knew he had a child, and if so, would he come back to her? But then, San would push the thought away. The war had taken everything, and she didn't want to hold on to an uncertain hope. She had once considered returning to her old village, but the war had turned it to ruins. Phnom Penh, though harsh, was the only place she could survive. Part 3 of the story, Tuan's Journey of Redemption. In 1989, after completing his mission as a Vietnamese volunteer soldier, Tuan returned to Vietnam. Back home, he felt like his life was an unfinished book, a chapter full of regrets, with the image of Chan Tha standing silently in the war-torn village, holding the wooden comb tightly in her hand, forever etched in his mind. Tuan realized that in order to atone for his actions towards Chan Tha, he needed to build a better life. He decided to enroll in a university in Ho Chi Minh City, majoring in economics. His journey as a student was not easy. As a returned soldier, Tuan had nothing but his bare hands and the scars of war. But the memories of Chan Tha, and his desire to make something meaningful out of his life, became the driving force that helped him overcome every challenge. His 4 years in university were filled with hardship, working odd jobs from unloading cargo and waiting tables to tutoring. Many nights, Tuan sat alone in his cramped room, gazing out into the dark sky, with only the image of Chan Tha and the wooden comb in his mind. He had given her his promise to return. His words on the day of their farewell still echoed in his mind like a wound that would never heal. After graduation, Tuan began working at an import-export company. With his diligence and intelligence, he quickly rose through the ranks. By the early years, Tuan had become a successful businessman in Saigon, owning his own company specializing in the import and export of timber. However, despite all his success, his heart remained empty. Every night in his vast room, he still asked himself, "Chan Tha, where are you now? Do you still have that comb?" The memory of Chan Tha had never faded over time. Tuan had tried to love again, even becoming engaged to a woman, but nothing worked. The image of Chan Tha haunted him like a constant reminder of the unfinished love he had left behind in a foreign land in 2005. During a business trip to Cambodia, Tuan decided to return to Vai, his hometown, to search for Chan Tha. He returned to the old village that had witnessed their brief, beautiful love. But when he arrived, he realized that the village had changed too much. The war had erased many familiar traces. The red dirt roads were now covered in grass, and the small wooden house where Chan Tha had once lived was now a pile of rubble. Tuan wandered around the village, asking the elderly about Chan Tha, but no one knew where she was. A few people vaguely remembered that a young woman had once lived there, but after the war she had left without a trace. "She probably moved to the city," one person told him. Tuan stood motionless in front of the ruins of Chan Tha's home, his heart squeezed by feelings of regret and helplessness. He blamed himself for not keeping his promise, for leaving Chan Tha to face the harsh life alone. Tuan continued to Phnom Penh, searching for Chan Tha, scouring every street, asking around at markets and eateries, but all in vain. Finally, Tuan returned to Vietnam, carrying the weight of his pain. On the flight back to Saigon, he promised himself, "Chan Tha, wherever you are, I hope you're living well. I will keep searching for you, even if it takes a lifetime. Part B of the story, The Journey Across Borders of a Dream, takes place in a small neighborhood in Phnom Penh, where San and her daughter Sneang's home is filled with rare laughter. Sneang had just received good news. She had won a full scholarship to a university in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. This achievement was the result of years of tireless effort, not only from the young girl, but also from her mother, who had poured all her energy into raising her daughter. San quietly watched her daughter smile in happiness. Her heart was filled with pride, but also some anxiety. She knew Sneang was growing up, ready for a new journey, but as a mother she couldn't help but worry about her daughter living so far away in another country. "Sneang, I believe in you. You're much stronger than I am," San said, choking back tears as she embraced her daughter. Sneang smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Mom, I promise I won't disappoint you. I will study hard, and one day I'll bring you to live in a beautiful house." Looking at her daughter's joy with the acceptance letter in her hand, memories of the hard years flooded back to San. When Tuan left, she was only 20 years old, carrying an unborn child and not knowing how to protect herself. After moving to Phnom Penh, San changed her name to San, a new identity to begin a new life, leaving behind the painful past she didn't want anyone, not even her daughter, to know about. Life in the city was not easy. With no job and no family, San had to take on any work she could find, washing dishes, cleaning, or selling at street markets. She worked tirelessly every day, but when she returned home and saw Sneang smile, it gave her new strength. She never told her daughter about the man from her past, the one who had left both love and pain in her heart. It wasn't because she blamed Tuan, but because she didn't want Sneang to live in the shadow of an unfinished love story. She wanted her daughter to grow up with a pure soul, untainted by her mother's past. Some memories are best kept in the heart, San thought. Despite the hardships, they hadn't taken away the intelligence and determination of Sneang, the young, beautiful girl who was both smart and diligent in her studies. She was always at the top of her class throughout her high school years. When she received the scholarship to study in Vietnam, she knew this was the opportunity to fulfill the big dreams that her mother had once missed. The night before her departure, the two sat together in their small room talking for a long time. Sovan carefully packed each item for her daughter, not forgetting to remind her of the little things. Yet, deep within her eyes, there was a sadness she couldn't hide. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I'm just going to school, not leaving forever," San joked to make her mother happy, smiling and trying to conceal the tear that almost fell. "I just want you to live well. Remember, I'll always be here waiting for your return," Sovan said. As the bus pulled away to take her to Vietnam, Sovan stood silently, watching until her daughter's figure disappeared. Her heart was filled with hope, but also with worry. She knew that her gentle and intelligent daughter was about to enter a completely new world where no one could predict what lay ahead. In September 2007, San arrived in Ho Chi Minh City, her first time in the bustling city, so different from Phnom Penh. Everything was new and challenging, but her eyes always sparkled with hope. This was her chance to change her life and repay her mother's sacrifices. During her first days away from home, she was somewhat disoriented. She had to adjust to a new environment, a different language, and new people. However, with her intelligence and determination, she quickly won the favor of her teachers and peers. She stood out not only for her gentle beauty, but also for her diligence in studies. Yet, deep down, she always missed her mother. Every night she called San to share her new experiences, from strange foods to the crowded streets she had to walk through daily. San would listen quietly, smile, and remind her daughter to take care of her health. But behind those phone calls, she would quietly cry, missing her and worrying about her every little detail. One day, the university San was attending organized a seminar for students in the economics field. This was an important event, attracting many successful business people to share their experiences. One of the guests was a special name, Tuan. Tuan, a famous entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of a large group in Ho Chi Minh City. On that day, San got up early, dressed neatly in her white uniform, excited to attend the seminar, hoping to learn from successful people. When she entered the large conference room, she felt the formal and professional atmosphere. Tuan appeared on stage with confidence and charm. Even in his 40s, he still maintained a handsome appearance, with slightly graying hair and bright eyes. His speech about the journey of starting a business and the lessons of success captivated the audience throughout. Tuan couldn't help but notice a young girl sitting in the front row, her eyes sparkling with attentiveness and eagerness to learn. There was something familiar about her, as though he had met her somewhere before, but he couldn't recall where. After the seminar, San boldly approached him to ask some questions about things she was still unclear about. The young girl politely greeted him, her soft voice full of confidence. "Uncle, I really admire your story, and I would like to ask how to maintain belief in oneself when facing failure." Tuan looked at her, surprised by her maturity and intelligence. He answered sincerely and then asked a few questions about her background and why she chose this field of study. When he learned that she was a Cambodian student, he became even more curious. "What's your name?" Tuan asked. "My name is San, and I'm from Phnom Penh," she replied. The name made Tuan pause for a moment. A vague memory flashed through his mind, but he quickly pushed it away. Tuan didn't want his personal emotions to affect the conversation. The name was beautiful, and he believed that with her intelligence and effort, she would succeed. He smiled warmly as he spoke. From that day, Tuan and Sovan began keeping in touch. He often sent her study materials and occasionally invited her to attend other seminars to broaden her knowledge. To Tuan, Sovan was a young woman full of potential, and he wanted to help her grow. Sovan felt the special attentions from Tuan. He was not only a teacher but also like a father who was always willing to listen and offer valuable advice. Every time they spoke, she felt a growing closeness, as if there was an invisible bond between them. Gradually, Tuan began to realize that he was developing unfamiliar feelings when he was around Sovan. It was no longer just the concern of a teacher for a student, but a warm, familiar sensation he couldn't explain. Every time he saw her smile, he felt like he was reconnecting with a part of his lost memories. On Sovan's side, she also began to realize that she often thought about Tuan. Despite the age gap, his maturity, warmth, and sensitivity made her feel protected and safe. However, both of them tried to suppress their feelings. Tuan told himself that the age difference and the teacher-student relationship didn't allow him to think further. Meanwhile, Sovan constantly reminded herself that Tuan was just a teacher, a mentor she admired. But fate had begun to weave a different story with unexpected twists, one neither of them could have foreseen. In April 2008, Sovan had become accustomed to life in Ho Chi Minh City. The first-year student was immersing herself in the new cultural experiences, the people, and the country she had always admired. During her time there, her relationship with Tuan, the man she greatly respected, became even more connected. Tuan always took care of her like family, helping her adjust to the new life. One day, Sovan accidentally came across information about an exhibition titled Memories of War and Vietnam-Cambodia Friendship, to be held at the Saigon Cultural Center. The exhibition would showcase wartime photos and the stories of soldiers and civilians who had lived through the brutal era. With her love for history and curiosity about the relationship between the two nations, Sovan eagerly suggested to Tuan that they attend together. Initially, Tuan refused, citing his busy work schedule, but after Sovan's persistence, he reluctantly agreed. At the exhibition, the solemn and quiet atmosphere of the black and white photos made Tuan feel nostalgic. He had been a part of that history, living through the harsh times and witnessing the pain of war. While Sovan happily explored each area, Tuan walked slowly, his eyes seemingly searching for something familiar among the buried memories. Suddenly, he froze in front of a large photo prominently displayed. The photo showed a group of Vietnamese volunteer soldiers helping a Cambodian village rebuild after the war. Among the crowd was a young woman with bright eyes and a radiant smile, holding a water basin. Tuan's heart stopped. He stepped closer, unable to take his eyes off the face. It was Chun Tha, the woman he had once loved. All the buried emotions from the past surged up. He stood motionless before the photo, his mind racing with countless questions. Noticing Tuan's odd behavior, Sovan walked over to him. "Uncle Tuan, what's wrong? Is there something special about this photo?" she asked. Tuan shook his head, trying to hide his emotions, and smiled faintly. "It's nothing. It just reminds me of the past when I was in Cambodia." Sovan curiously glanced at the photo, but she didn't recognize the woman in it, unaware that the woman in the photo was her mother when she was young. Tuan tried to stay composed, but inside, a storm of emotions was raging. He wondered where Chun Tha was now. Was she happy? Did she still remember him? In the days following the exhibition, Tuan became increasingly withdrawn. The image of Chun Tha in the photo haunted him, and he couldn't stop thinking about the past. He decided to search for her. Tuan contacted several old friends who had been Vietnamese soldiers in Cambodia, asking for any news of Chun Tha, but none of them knew anything. He also tried reaching out through organizations that helped former soldiers and the Cambodian community in Vietnam, but still, there were no leads. Meanwhile, Sovan remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil that was stirring within the man she respected. Every day she brought joy to Tuan with her optimism and admiration. As time passed, their relationship became more intimate. Sovan felt the warmth and safety when she was with Tuan. She began to develop special feelings for him that she couldn't explain. There was one occasion when Tuan sat down with her and asked about her mother's name. Sovan replied that her mother had always been a normal woman who never talked about her father. This response further convinced Tuan that there was nothing unusual to suspect. One day, Tuan decided to confess his feelings. He couldn't wait any longer. Although he felt guilty due to the age difference and their father-daughter relationship, his feelings had grown too deep. He called Sovan and asked her to sit across from him in his quiet office. His eyes were filled with sincerity and concern. "Sovan, there's something I need to tell you," he began. Tuan spoke to Snang as she tilted her head and smiled. "Yes, uncle. Tell me, I'm listening." Tuan hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "Actually, I've thought a lot about our relationship ever since you entered my life. I feel like I've been reborn and loved again. I know I'm much older than you, but love doesn't recognize age. Sneang, I love you." Snang stood still, unable to believe Tuan had confessed his feelings like that. Confusion and emotions suddenly flooded her heart. Tuan looked directly into her eyes, waiting for her answer. "Uncle Tuan," she said, her voice trembling, I don't know yet. I need some time." Tuan didn't pressure her, knowing this was a big decision for both of them. But deep down, he believed their love would overcome any obstacles. Time passed, and Sneng realized that her feelings for Tuan were more than respect. She truly loved him. They began to plan their future together. Tuan suggested a simple yet warm wedding, wanting to officially bring Sneng into his life as his wife, someone he would love and care for. Though still hesitant, Sneng finally agreed. They decided to have a small wedding in Saigon, then bring Sneng back to Cambodia to introduce her to her mother. What Tuan didn't know was that the woman he had been searching for years ago was actually the biological mother of the girl he was about to marry. This part of the story would later unfold in a tragic twist at the wedding. In December 2008, Saigon entered the busy last days of the year, with sparkling lights filling the streets. Srey Neang and Tuan were also busy preparing for their wedding. They had rented a small, cozy hall and invited only close friends and Tuan's colleagues. Tuan was overwhelmed with happiness as he watched Srey Neang in her white wedding dress. She was not just his current love but also the light that saved his life after years of loneliness. Srey Neang, though happy, still had doubts. Their love had transcended age, but sometimes she felt there was something missing, as though a piece of her life story was incomplete. In Phnom Penh, San, the new name of Chan Tha, received an invitation to her daughter's wedding. In the letter, Srey Neang wrote that she had found true love in Vietnam and hoped her mother could come to bless her. San was moved to tears. For years, she had worried that she couldn't provide her daughter with a complete family. But now, seeing Srey Neang grown up and finding happiness, she felt a burden lifted from her heart. She decided to travel to Vietnam, bringing with her a wooden comb, the only memento of her first love, as a blessing for her daughter. In her mind, Tuan's image had faded over the years, and she never imagined she would meet him again. The wedding day finally arrived. The hall was beautifully decorated, filled with flowers and lights. Tuan wore a stylish suit, and Srey Neang looked stunning in her pure white dress. Guests began arriving to offer their blessings. Tuan stood at the door, greeting each guest with a bright smile. Suddenly his eyes froze when he saw a woman walking in. Tuan couldn't believe his eyes. Her face had changed due to a cruel illness, but he recognized her immediately. His heart tightened. "Chan Tha, is it really you?" Srey Neang also stood frozen, realizing who the groom was. Her mind was flooded with memories from almost 20 years ago. Her eyes widened in shock and pain. "Tuan, is that really you?" They both stood there, staring at each other in disbelief, unable to speak. After the ceremony, when the guests had settled into their seats, San suddenly walked over to the main table. In her hand was the wooden comb, Tuan's gift to her, before he left Cambodia. "Do you remember this comb, Tuan?" she asked, her voice trembling and her eyes filled with tears. Tuan stared at the comb and stammered, "How do you have it? Could it be that you're Chan Tha?" Srey Neang was sitting next to Tuan, equally stunned, looking at her mother and the man she loved. "Mother, Uncle Tuan, do you two know each other?" San couldn't hold back any longer and burst into tears. "Srey Neang, Uncle Tuan is the man I once loved. He's your biological father." Her words struck like lightning, leaving Srey Neang standing up, confused, and turning to her mother. "What do you mean? How can this be true?" Tuan collapsed into a chair, his eyes red and his face pale, as painful memories pieced together into an unbearable truth. The woman he loved, the woman he was about to marry, was his own daughter. The wedding hall erupted into chaos as guests murmured. But to the three of them, all sounds seemed to fade away. Srey Neang cried out, "Why? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did I end up in this situation?" San cried uncontrollably, falling to her knees before her daughter. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how to tell you. I just wanted you to have a peaceful life, free from the pain of my past." Tuan clutched his head, his voice choked with emotion. "Chan Tha, if I had known Srey Neang was my daughter, I would never have let things go this far." Srey Neang couldn't take it anymore and ran out of the hall. Her heart shattered. That night, Tuan and San faced each other in a small room at Tuan's house. Both were exhausted from the pain and torment. "How did everything turn out like this?" Chan Tha asked. "I've been looking for you all these years, but I never imagined that when I found you it would be like this." Tuan's voice was hoarse from crying. "I never thought I would meet you again, Tuan. I tried to forget you, to build a new life for Srey Neang. But fate has played us this cruel trick." San lowered her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I was wrong to hide the truth from Srey Neang. But how could I tell her that she was the result of a love born in the midst of war?" Tuan stared out the window, his pain not just from lost love, but from the helplessness of realizing that he had unintentionally hurt his own daughter. Meanwhile, Srey cried alone in a small room, unable to accept the truth. The man she loved, admired, and looked up to was her biological father. Her emotions were a whirlwind of confusion and heartbreak. The day after the wedding cancellation, San made a difficult decision to return to Cambodia with her daughter. She knew that only time and distance could heal the wounds that had been caused to everyone involved. Before leaving, she wrote a letter to Tuan, in which she expressed, "Tuan, thank you for loving me and my daughter. But perhaps fate did not allow us to be together. I am sorry for keeping the truth from you all these years, and I ask for your forgiveness for my ignorance. Please, let time heal this wound." Tuan read the letter with tears streaming down his face. He understood that he had lost both love and hope. A week after the wedding was called off, Tuan decided to return to Cambodia, carrying simple gifts that held deep emotional value. Among them was an old photograph taken during his time as a volunteer. "Soldier!" Tuan stood in front of San's small house, his heart heavy. The door opened and San stepped out. Her face appeared tired, her eyes weary, but when she saw him, a soft kindness flickered in her gaze. "Tuan, what are you doing here?" Her voice was hoarse, a mixture of surprise and hesitation. "I came to apologize and make amends. I was wrong for not knowing about you and our daughter, but I cannot continue living with this regret." Tuan reached into his pocket and took out the old photo. His hands trembled as he said, "This is all I have left from that time. I cannot turn back time, but I want to make up for what I've missed, for you and on, with everything I have." Seeing the photo brought back old memories for San. Tears fell from her eyes, not only because of the pain from the past, but also because of the sincerity in Tuan's eyes. "You know, Tuan, before you returned to Vietnam, I discovered that I was carrying your child. But after all that has happened, I understand that war did not allow us to choose our path. I lived to raise our daughter, and that is all I needed to do." After their meeting in Cambodia, Tuan did not return immediately to Vietnam. He decided to stay in Phnom Penh for a while to help San and her daughter. At first, San avoided him. She could not easily forgive the wounds she had endured. But every day, Tuan came to encourage the young girl, explaining the context of how he and her mother met and fell in love during the war. Gradually, his small actions began to touch her heart, and his caring words made her realize that despite the late timing, Tuan truly loved her as a father. Following their reunion in Cambodia, Tuan began the legal process to bring San and her daughter to Vietnam. He wanted to make up for the losses that they had endured for over 2 decades. Not only did he wish to compensate for the loss suffered by his daughter, but Tuan also made efforts to help Sovan, San's mother. He took her to the best hospital in Vietnam to treat the disease that had tormented her for years. During this time, Tuan never left her side, caring for her as he had wished he could when he was young. One day, after a surgery, San woke up to find Tuan asleep beside her, holding her hand tightly. "Tuan, you don't have to do all of this. I have sacrificed my youth for you and our daughter. This is the only way I can make amends, San," he whispered softly. San smiled for the first time in many years, her smile no longer sad. Tuan shook his head, his eyes moist with emotion. "I missed out on your youth. I can't get those years back, but I will care for you from now on, until the end of my life. You have suffered enough." These words caused San to break down in tears. She understood that Tuan's regret was real, and his feelings for her were unchanged. After so many years apart, despite the pain of the past still weighing on him, Tuan continued to encourage San to pursue her education. He enrolled her in a prestigious university in Saigon and arranged for a private tutor to assist her in the beginning. One evening, while they were having dinner together, Tuan gently spoke to San. "I know there are many things you can't forgive me for, But I hope you will try your best in your studies, because your future is also what your mother and I have sacrificed our lives for." San remained silent for a long time, then nodded quietly. She knew that while her heart had not fully opened to him, Tuan was genuinely trying to fulfill his responsibility as a father. The pain of living together in one house brought both joy and sorrow to the three of them. For Tuan, every time he looked at Srey Neang, he felt happiness to be close to his daughter, but he also couldn't avoid the guilt from the mistakes of his past. One night, when everyone else had fallen asleep, Tuan sat quietly in his study, tears falling as he reflected on the suffering he had caused. He whispered to himself, "No matter what, I will make up for my wrongs, because San, whose old name was Chantha, and Shnang are the only family I have left." A moving moment occurred one day when Shnang was preparing to go to school. She saw Tuan standing outside the door holding the keys to a luxury car. He smiled gently and said, "I don't know if you'll like this color, but I think it suits you. I just want you to be as comfortable as possible when going to school." Snang looked at the car parked outside, unsure of when it had arrived. Then she looked at Tuan, took the car keys in her hands, her tears streaming down her cheeks, and softly said, "Thank you, Dad." It was the first time she had called him Dad. Tuan stood still, choked with emotion, unable to speak. As time passed, Tuan's efforts gradually healed the emotional wounds of Sniang. She came to realize that, although it was late, he had given everything to make up for what he had done to her and her mother. The three of them began to build a new life, not only through love but also through understanding and responsibility. Tuan opened a charity foundation named Srey Neang to help poor children, as a way of making amends for his past mistakes. Through their story, people realized that love is not just an emotion, it is also responsibility and sacrifice. Sometimes, even if it is late, sincere regret can create miracles, allowing people to find happiness they had lost. This is the conclusion of the story of love, compassion, and forgiveness. The touching story of Tuan, San, and Sneang is not just a tragedy of people who once went astray, but also a profound lesson about love, responsibility, and forgiveness. We see that while life may lead people into irreversible mistakes, as long as there is a sincere heart that knows how to love and make amends, light will always shine through even the darkest corners. Tuan, once a man full of guilt, used the rest of his life to care for the woman he loved and his biological daughter, Sovan. Despite enduring much suffering, Sovan was willing to open her heart to forgive, and San, once a deeply hurt woman, learned to overcome her pain and accept the love of her biological father. They moved forward on a new path together. This story brings the message that, no matter how many losses or hardships we face, kindness and sincere love will always be the key to unlocking happiness. Let this story spread these beautiful values to many more people. If you feel the deep meaning, the compassion, and the invaluable lesson in this story, please like and share it with your friends and family to spread the message of love. Subscribe to our channel to continue accompanying us, and listen to many more touching and meaningful stories. Thank you for your support. Your love and companionship are the great motivation for us to continue delivering meaningful content.